Learn these four positions. White to play as a win, black to play as a draw. White to play as a win, black to play as a draw. White to play as a win, black to play as a draw. White to play as a draw, black to play as a draw. Learn those four positions, watch the previous video on rook versus pawn, learn these positions, and now we're going to get on to some harder positions. Position 1, this is a game from 2011, it's white to play. Pause the video, have a good long think about it, and decide what you'll play. So one of the reasons that the positions in this video are harder than the previous one is that that sort of memory point, that crossroads that I called it, does feature in all of these, but it's just one possible line. There's other stuff going on which needs calculating, and it's hard because each line you've got to calculate sort of got, you know, 4 or 5 forcing moves leading somewhere else, and even 3 or 4 moves into there's a possible choice, and it's tough to analyse. I mean, to make progress here as white, you're thinking, you know, it's got to be either move your king forward or move your pawn forward. You can see that your rook's about to get lost for this g2 pawn, and it's going to be rook versus pawn. The question is, well, or is it going to be rook versus pawn? You know, one of the choices you've got is, I mean, your rook's going to get lost for this pawn, probably, depending on what you did next, actually. Now you might be thinking, and when I first did this, I thought, well, I can't play king a5. You can't play king a5 because of rook f5 check, and black gets the queen. Okay. So let's look into the other moves. That's basically as far as my thinking got on that, or where my thinking should have gone on that was like, well, the problem with king a5 is we've got this check, queen g1, g1 equals queen, sorry, and then you should be thinking, well, that doesn't look good, but is that lost? You know, there's always that as a last resort, isn't there? But let's go back and look at some other stuff. So if you rejected that because of that position, rejected rook king a5 because of that, that was a mistake. Just to write it off. I mean, it might turn out that you can see a drawing line in b5. It might turn out that b5 is a draw, in which case fine. But I was still wrong. Even if b5 does turn out to be a draw, I was still wrong to write off king a5 as, oh, I can't play that because of this, that, and the other. You know, rook versus queen, because that position might be lost, but it's a last resort, isn't it? It's definitely playable. At the very least, it's actually a draw. Believe it or not, it's a table-based draw. It still looks pretty hard, but the point is, it's if it's a table-based draw, it's possible for a human to try something, isn't it? Like, you know, theoretically, a human can draw it if it's a table-based draw. Anyway, what's the problem with b5? Well, the first thing you've got to think about is even if a takes b5 check, and we're going to lead to that, or white to play as a win, black to play as a draw, that business, or in this case, black to play as a win, white to play as a draw, you want it to be white to play and get the draw. Even if that leads there, you've still then got to come back and analyse this. Okay. And when you're analysing that, you've got, right, well, king b4, that would allow a5 check, even worse than a5 check, something I didn't see when I first looked into this. G1 equals queen, rook takes G1, intermezzo A5 check. That's gone. Okay, so that's relatively simple to see. The rook A1 check, king B4 is lost. But you've also got rook A1 check, king B3. Queens, takes, and you think, well, I could have the A pawn there. That's pretty hard. That position, trying to work out who's winning that, it doesn't look good for white. It's not. It's minus 44. But black's got to find the right moves. And it's very hard to analyse that position here. Very, very hard in my view. Very, very hard to analyse that position. It is lost. King g4, king b4. The black just brings their king back. You know, what's white going to do? They can't push the a pawn. Rook a1 behind it. The black king is just back, and this pawn is just not far forward enough to help white out in their cause. So yeah, you had to analyse Rook a1 check, which is also a win for black, by the way. But you could, in this particular case, you could get away with not analysing Rook a1 check, because when you analyse the other line, that's also lost, and that's, in my view, calculatable. So if I personally, I think good analysis here should run along the lines of, if I play b5 check, black's got Rook a1 check. That's a can of worms that I need to come back and look at, but I only need to come back and look at it if just the simple a takes b5 check. If I can get a draw there as white, then b5's good, but I've got to come back and analyse Rook a1 check. If this is still a win for black anyway, then you don't need to bother analysing Rook a1 check, and you might as well go back to the original position and go for that Rook versus Queen ending. Now you've only got one move here, because if you take with the pawn, well, if the reason you played b5 is because you didn't like Rook f5 check, you should definitely be spotting this. Okay, I mean, if you miss that, you deserve to lose, in my view. So yeah, king takes b5, and it's going to be rook versus pawn. Now white's got a choice here. I'm going to cover shouldering in the case of rook versus pawn on its own in a separate video, but none of these things can actually be studied in isolation. I've actually found it quite difficult to structure how I'm doing these videos for rook versus pawn, because shouldering is an idea, and we want our king on this side of the pawn so we can shoulder black's king away, and if we go through that, we're going to get down to the classic pivotal position that I'm saying that we should all just memorize. King c6, king g4, c5, king f5, king d7. Black plays the time-gaining check. Very important. King f6, c6. Black to play as a win, white to play as a draw. It's black to play, so it's a win for black. White's lost that. Okay, so king c6, cutting across your own pawn to come and do the shouldering. No good. No good. So really all you can do is go for c5. Now I haven't really talked about this yet in the previous video or in this one. It's just simple counting. There's no sort of shouldering or getting to that pivotal position. It is just counting the moves. If white's not going to come across to the d file and hassle the black king away, we've seen that doesn't work. It's just a simple case of counting. So yeah, black king's going to make its way to the d7 square, and you've just got to count the moves, really. It's gone. It's lost. And that means, back in this position, you could be thinking, right, if I play b5, then, well, black's got rook a1 check. I don't know where that leads, but it could be nasty. But first of all, is this a draw? Because if this is a draw, then I've got to come back and analyze rook a1 check. And you go through this line. You analyze king c6, cutting across the pawn, and that leads to the pivotal, critical position, the crossroads position, I call it. You've lost. So your only other choice is to play, is just do the race, basically. Just push the c pawn. That's very easy. That's just a case of counting, and you've lost. So there's no point analysing b5 followed by rook a1 check, because the very simple a takes b5, you're lost. And you may as well go for king a5. I mean, you never know. Black might not even spot rook f5 check. Although, if we're going to be playing chess like that, then my argument about not needing to analyse rook a1 falls apart, doesn't it? Because you say, well, you never know. Black might not take the pawn on b5. But yeah, with Black's best move, rook f5 check takes queen g1, and then rook c5 is the best move, and this is a draw apparently. Queen a1 check, king b6, king g4. It's going to be hard though. It's going to be hard. I mean, guess what white should play next? I mean, I'll give you multiple choice. Putting the rook on one of these three squares is minus 0.2. One of the others is minus 0.8, and one of the others is minus 1.3. The best king move you can get is king b7, and that's minus 1.4. And believe it or not, the best move is that. Wow, that seems one of the least human moves to make. You know, just move your rook away from being protected by your king for now. It's just, yeah. So whatever the table bases say, that was obviously hard. So yeah, I suppose in a game it would be up to you really. Do you think you can defend that position? But I would say it's fairly easy. Not easy, but it's calculatable, isn't it? Or calculable, or whatever the word is. That b5 led to a loss. Even ignoring Black's rook a1 check. Right, next. This is a game from 2013. It's white to play. Pause the video and decide what would you do. Although, I think there's only one thing you can do. I can't see. I mean, yeah, pause the video. What would you do here as white? I can't see there's anything else you can do. So the question in the book, and this is the Book of Jesus workbook. This position's from. It's do we play knight takes c4? Do we sack our knight for the two pawns, basically? But I can't see what else we can do. I mean, the engine's saying knight d7, rook c7, knight to b6, and I'm just not sure how white's getting anywhere there, to be honest. It's sort of obstinate engine defence, but it's still -7. So, yeah, I mean, the only other sensible sort of human thing I can think to do there, which is clearly lost, is take the pawn whilst your knight's still, you know, stopping the rook from protecting it. But you just pinned your knight, so Black can just calmly take the b2 pawn, and as soon as you move your king, I don't really care where you move it. Rook takes, and whether you take with the pawn or the king, you know, you can see if you take with the pawn, Black's 2 tempi ahead, and that's not even a bishop's pawn. You know, Black's going to queen, and then you play e7, I think. Is that right? 1, 2, 3, 4, and then 1, 2, 3. Yeah, so Black will queen, and then you play e7, and we know that's a loss. So the only other thing to think to do is to keep it as a bishop's pawn, but it's just not even close. Now, I mean, you could play f7 here, but Black's then got this. You know, the king's just too far out of it. So it's a pretty obvious loss if you take on f5. So what else can you do? Knight takes e4, and then king takes f5. And one thing that you could calculate is counting out the moves from here, from king takes b2. Your f pawn's being hit, so you'd have to stay on the defence of it. And now let's just sort of assume Black does the polite thing and it sort of heads towards that that pivotal critical position. Just sort of, I mean, they could try and what they'd like to do if they could is is leave their rook there, because it doesn't really matter if it's, I suppose it's a 5th rank thing, but it's just clumsy. It's getting in the way of the king. You know, the black king needs to make its way to there, I suppose. Which maybe it could do, actually, thinking about it. I might look at that in a sec. But let's say that black sort of politely plays rook c1, f5, king c3, and you just get on with it. Time gaining check, fine, king c4, f6, king c5. Yeah, I mean, it's just, you're not even close, basically. And let's just quickly go back to that, trying to get the king to c6 rather than politely moving the rook back. King b3, f5, king b4. I mean, engine's saying king. It is saying f6 as one of the moves. It also had king d5. This is the thing, you're heading towards those positions, but there's all these other moves as well, which what makes these harder positions. And you know, we're going to try and get to this position. I mean, this is even black to play as a draw, white to play as a draw, because it's a 5th rank one. So even if it was black's move, we've got the trick of heading towards rook versus knight. But so it's just drawn, and then it's thought, well, okay, but then black's not going to do that, are they? They're going to play other stuff like rook c5 check. The king could go to e6 there, but another good move is king e4. That's sort of a bit of a shouldering trick. When I do the shouldering positions, I'm going to do a video just on shouldering in rook versus pawn, and it's going to have moves like that where the king sort of paradoxically moves backwards to keep the enemy king out, but it is the only drawing move. Anyway, king c3, f5, and that's kind of happening here, to be honest. And yeah, black's just getting nowhere. It's not the position we talked about where black to play as a win, white to play as a draw, but it is. You can see that sort of black's getting nowhere. So, I mean, given that you can't think of anything else to do, there is nothing else to do. And when you take on f5, if black plays king takes b2, it is a draw. Very sensible thing to try and do. Unfortunately, from here, black should leave this pawn. It's just completely inconsequential, and instead just play king d3. And it's just completely gone. I mean, there are some example lines. They're not heading towards that critical crossroads position. There's other things going on, and the rook sort of clumsily in the way of the normal winning attack plan, although even that I think here could probably be alright. I'm just trying to think actually, if I just played rook c1 oh no, that does actually throw away the win. Okay, so black does need to keep going with the things like rook e4 checks, obviously a very good move. King back to f5 and then rook back to e1, yes, that does it. And you just look at different things like white could try to like push the b pawn maybe, king d4, b5, rook b1, gone, or back in this position, king f6, king e4, f5, rook f1, it's gone. So yeah, in this position here, if black wastes time on this insignificant pawn rather than coming to hunt the more dangerous one, and just get their king back into the position this way, then yeah, white can draw. But yeah, king d3 is a very easy win, which means unfortunately white's pretty lost in that original position. Right, next, this is a game from 2009. It's black to play. Decide on your plan. What would you do? There are two drawing moves in the original position. I actually found the one that the book describes as dubious. So this and Jesus de la Villa says that yeah, this does draw, but you have to find a very difficult second move, which I did. So I guess I was sort of happy enough with that. But the simplest way to draw this, which I sort of do agree with having read it afterwards, is just take the f pawn. King takes f3. White should ignore this insignificant pawn as much as possible, as we've talked about. King c6, f4, king d5, king e3. There's your time-gaining check. King c4, f3, king c3. White to play, well, ignore the g6 pawn, pretend it's not there. If that were the case, white to play is a win, black to play is a draw. And in fact, because the rook's behind the pawn, if the g6 pawn wasn't on the board, white would have two winning moves in this position if the g6 pawn wasn't there. That check and also king c2 would be a winning move, remember, from all the stuff we discussed in the last video. Now it's black to play, which means it's a draw. And black, if they wanted to, could pretend they haven't got a g6 pawn and they could just play king e2. Just pretend they haven't got a g6 pawn and it's fine. They might have winning ambitions at this point, but it's a bit dangerous. I think I would play king e2, and you can still hope that white messes up there. There's a king e2. Yeah, white hasn't really got any losing moves on the next move. I was just sort of looking down. White can't really mess that up. Engine reckons you should play, well, king e2, g5 or f2 are all drawing moves. g5 is an interesting one, because I'd start to worry after king c2 that the king's getting in. But I think on both sides I'd be worried a little bit here. I'd be worried about white. It's like, well, hang on, that pawn's not insignificant in a minute. Because, for example, if f2, that would be hopeless if black didn't have a g-pawn, king d1, but black does have a g-pawn. Yeah, we're going to get some sort of tail hook eventually here, aren't we? So the white king, the rook can just sort of check the hell out of the black king until it gives up control of the e2 square or something like that, I suspect. But yeah, I think white's given themselves a problem there. Anyway, black can draw it quite happily by playing king takes f3. You can also draw it playing g5, but white's got this move, which is a bit nasty. Rook f7. You don't want to push the g-pawn there, because then your king's on the wrong side of the pawn, and then it would just be a simple case of counting. I can just guarantee that is lost. Completely gone. White doesn't even need to hurry. Even king c7 is winning there. Just showing that white is so won that white doesn't have to race to get to e2 straight away. So don't do that. So after rook f7, you'd have to find this this shouldering move, which I sort of quite happily did, to be honest. King e5, king c6, then push the g-pawn, rook behind it. There, no point in the time gaining check because you've already got the maximum optimal position. King d4, g3, king d3. White to play is a win, black to play is a draw, and it's black to play, so it's a draw. But I think we can all agree that, all right, yeah, that's a draw, but that position's definitely a draw at the very minimum for black. So it was better to play king takes f3 on the first move. Right, next, this is a game from 1976. It is white to play. Can you win this? What would you do on your next move? Pause the video and have a go. So this one's maybe not one of the harder ones, actually. I don't think it's as hard as the ones we've looked at so far in this video. I think in the game rook takes g6 was played, and I don't think it takes much to analyse rook takes g6 and realise it's a mistake. f4, king c4, f3, king c3, white to play as a win, black to play as a draw, and it's black to play, so it's a draw. And we've already seen the theme of, in rook versus pawn, if the side with the pawn has a sort of an extra reasonably inconsequential pawn that doesn't look like a particularly important pawn at this stage, you get on with the same winning ideas sort of almost a race to that critical position without worrying about that inconsequential pawn. By the way, if you know quite a lot already about rook versus two pawns, the two connected pass pawns, this is also a very good idea. In fact, it's the engine's top move. But I'm trying to stay on the theme of rook versus one pawn, thinking of it as this one with the g6 pawn being inconsequential. So you can just look at the sort of the getting on with the winning method, almost ignoring the g6 pawn. I mean, it's also guarded, isn't it? If black pushes that g pawn, you can just take it. So I was just thinking about that and whether it's it's the one where we'd get the time gaining check and do the second winning move. I think. Let's analyse that quickly, just in case I've said the wrong thing. So I think I'd play a time gaining check, which I just cheated and looked at the engine, and is actually the only way of doing it. So yeah, of course, I was quite pleased I on the spot analysed that. And then white to play as a win, but only because the rook's already behind the pawn. This doesn't win. You're going to get rook versus knight. This is the only winning move. So yeah, I guess that try to push the pawn sort of showed you that it was an inconsequential pawn. So black will push the other pawn, f4, king c3, and then f3. You'd go rook e7 check. It's sort of ignore the g6 pawn again. White to play as a win, black to play as a draw. Now, we don't know for sure that white to play as a win because, all right, yeah, ignore the g6 pawn in terms of ideas, but there is a g6 pawn there. So does that change anything? Well, actually, no, because it's too far out of the game. It's still the same winning idea. As you can see, the king is going to get across. The black king's getting shoved this way, and yeah, the king and the rook are sort of easily going to be able to deal with those pawns. When you've got two connected pass pawns, if your king's if the king with the side with talk English eventually, if the side with the rook's king is in front of those two connected pass pawns, it's very effective to have your rook off to the side, delivering checks, guarding things from the side. So that's why at the beginning, rook a7 was actually an absolutely fine way to win it. But not this, not rook takes g6. Like I say, I think that was fairly sort of calculatable, that if you head towards the critical pivotal position, it's just a draw. Right, 2006 game. Next, it's black to play. Pause the video and decide what you'll do as black. Now this is a hard position again. There's a bit more going on than just a sort of polite counting moves. Counting moves with both sides sort of politely moving towards that critical position. Because the black rook's sort of in an uncomfortable place. This h7 pawn is sort of insignificant, but it's about to queen. It's completely contained, fine. But we can't just start moving our rook anywhere around the board completely because it will queen. I mean, you probably guess with a bit of lateral thinking that the fact that it's ended up in a sort of pause the video and think about it moment, that taking this inconsequential pawn does actually throw away the win, because what you should be concentrating on is getting your king back to try and sort out this pawn. That was the more important pawn to worry about. But it's not just as simple as that, because that's, like I said, the black rook is now sort of in a strange place. So it's not just a simple case of politely counting moves counting moves of both sides politely moving towards that position. c4, king f3, c5. So already, by the way, in this position here, if white plays king d5, they've now lost, and now you would play a check from the side, rook h5 check, that's either going to gain a vital tempo by pushing this king back, or if the king comes forward, the white king is in. c5, another check, and king d5. And white's pawn is lost. So, sometimes the rook can be effective from the side. I've got more to say on that in a later video as well. The sort of, but very very briefly, there's this thing where the rook can sort of chase with the opposition from behind. The rook can sort of chase the king up the board, and you think, oh great, I'll deliver checkmate on the last rank. But the knight comes to the rescue once again of the defending side. The knighting with check, and of course you've guessed it, that tactic doesn't work for a rook's pawn, so it's another way to win the position if there's a rook's pawn. I'm going to cover that in another video as well. But for now, let's go back to this position. King d5 loses. It's kind of shouldering again. Just keep the enemy king out. c5, king f4, c6, still shouldering. And you can kind of see the rooks just sort of stupidly placed here on h7. Like if black plays king f6, you go king d6, and there's just nothing that, I mean, that's going to transpose anyway. But the black rook's sort of stupidly placed or awkwardly placed. Rook h1, king d6. I mean, it's not even a time gaining check here, because you wouldn't be gaining time. You would improve white's position to get the king to d7. So king f6, black to play as a win, white to play is a draw. So with correct play by white, rook takes h7 doesn't do it, because in this position, with shouldering in mind, white should play c5, and that just leads to this drawn position. So ignore the inconsequential pawn and just start getting on with the same winning ideas. Get that king back. King f3, c4, king f4, king d5, king f5, c5. And now, I think I'm right in saying that if you take the pawn, you are, so taking the pawn's not going to help. You can still play king f6, that's a winning move, but also, you've got the opposition from the side here. You can start forcing that white king back, king c5, king c6, king e5, and it's just completely gone, because the black king is going to be getting to d7, and the black rook can just sort of stay on the last rank. The black rook can just stay on this 8th rank until we'll zugzwang white. You can imagine the white king's going to be on b7, pawn on c7. We'll have our king on d7, and the white king will have to move away from b7, and then we just come into c8, and then we take the pawn, take the other pawn, and win. So that was 5 harder positions, not stemming from, but in all of them, that crossroads position where I said learn these 4 positions, it was just there the whole time. But they were harder because it was only there as one possible variation. There was loads of other stuff going on in all of those positions. I need to talk about knight's pawns. I'm going to be going through this white to play 1954 study, which is extremely instructive. I mean, you could, if you wanted to, on the video. This video is about to stop, but you could pause the video now just before it's about to stop and white to play and try and win that. But I think I'll make a video just on that, actually. The sort of the special features of if it's rook versus pawn and it's a knight's pawn, because it gives the attacking side extra winning tricks, because the black king is sort of quite close to the edge of the board. Anyway, hope you enjoyed those other 5 harder positions, and we're all learning something.